It's been a bad week of economic news on inflation and interest rates for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives as they prepare for 4 unwanted by-elections, including one not far from Mr Sunak's own North Yorkshire patch in Selby and Ainsty. In the north of England, there are plans for a new government-backed organisation to help grow the region's economy, attract more foreign investment and act as one external voice for the region. But the issue of sewage in our lakes and rivers has reared up again, with large parts of Lancashire's coastline now not suitable for swimming after a storm overwhelmed our Victorian sewage systems. You should really stick around for our guest this week. It's Catherine Fletcher, the Conservative MP for South Ribble, that's the bit of Lancashire under Preston, talking about why we should be focusing on more than just big boys train sets when talking about transport links, and why a mayor like Andy Burnham might not be the answer for her home county of Lancashire. But first, let's take a look at some of this week's more interesting politics stories with a brilliant Northern journalist who's made his name in London, Kevin Maguire, associate editor at the Daily Mirror. Originally from South Shields in the northeast, he's a Sunderland supporter through his sins and a frequent contributor to the likes of Good Morning Britain and other TV shows. Kevin, welcome along.
Great to be with you, Rob.
Nice to have you on. Now, the first thing that we should talk about, given that we're recording this early afternoon on Thursday, is what's going on with the economy. So I think that is going to be the subject that's going to dominate political debate for months to come. Just a few minutes ago, the Bank of England unexpectedly pushed up interest rates to 5% in what was the sharpest hike since February in a bid to control persistent inflation. The bank said the 0.5 percentage point hike was required because wage growth and services inflation indicators which policymakers watch closely are still very high, too high, and the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey has warned that further rate rises could be required if inflation stays stubbornly high. So obviously, Kevin, neither of us are economists, but I think it is possible to talk about the politics of this, which is kind of obvious, isn't it, I guess, in that, I mean, this is terribly bad news, isn't it, for the Conservatives, for the next few months, mortgage holders and even people who rent, who might be affected by the knock-on effects of mortgage hikes, are going to be paying out more than they would previously. There's no good way to spin this, is there?
No, Rob, I'll have you know, I got an A in my A-level economics, and
I'm not giving you enough credit. Sorry.
I also studied it as part of my politics degree in York. But no, we're not economists, but we do know that rising interest rates are bad for you if you borrow, if you have a car loan, a credit card debt, a mortgage. You run a business, you're going to have to pay more to borrow. This is going to level down the north. It's not going to level it up, because there's a twin hammer blow now of inflation, which is stuck at 8.7%. I couldn't believe it when it didn't fall this week. I took a double take when I saw the figures, thinking, has it really not come down after it was predicted to do? And then going up a full half point to 5% is going to really hurt people. And we now risk going into recession. We thought we were going to escape it. We now risk it, because in order to cure inflation, the government is trying to hammer people through interest rates. So you got less to spend in shops, so shops have to cut their prices. And look, it's almost like voodoo economics. This you're going to be damaged whichever way it happens. It's politically disastrous for Rishi Sunak and the UK Conservative government, but more importantly, is going to really, really hurt people. And the Resolution Foundation, it's a think tank, got a very good track record, looks after people on low and middle incomes, says the mortgage hit is going to be about £2,900 on average for a family when they remortgage. Keir Starmer, Prime Minister's Questions, Labour leader, used it as a Tory mortgage penalty, he called it. And yep, it's politically bad, but more importantly, it's going to wreck the finances of families and some small businesses, actually some big businesses too, because people who borrowed when lending was cheap are now really just going to get crucified, really nailed to the cross of higher interest rates.
And I saw there was an interesting comment by, I think, one of Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's economic advisors earlier this week on on the BBC, he was saying that really the only way out of this, as he alluded to, is a recession. Basically, obviously, everyone thinks a recession, that's a terrible thing to happen, but actually, Jeremy Hunt and the Bank of England, in some ways, that's a desirable outcome for them, because that is the only way to stop people spending, to stop wages increasing, to stop people asking for more money, which is what is driving this inflation in the first place. So, I mean, that's a really bad position to be in, isn't it? And it means that there's no end in sight for the foreseeable future. Like, we're talking about maybe 2025 before interest rates and mortgage rates start coming down again.
Yeah, but it's got to be crazy Torynomics when Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, said 80% of the pressure for rising inflation initially was from abroad, not least Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which sent world food, gas, and oil prices soaring. So the pressures are coming there externally. You're clobbering people internally. You say they're concerned about their cost of living and their living standards. Well, yeah, inflation eats into that undoubtedly. But to bring that down, you say you're then going to increase the cost of borrowing and crash the economy and push it into recession. It just seems actually that the cure can be worse than the disease itself if you're going to do it this way around. I think it's kind of time to hold your nerve, and there's a lot of criticism of the Bank of England not acting early enough on inflation. That means didn't put up interest rates fast enough, but now they seem to be going up and up and up and up, and inflation is still stuck. I just wonder if you've just got it completely the way around, and traditional economic thinking is rather basic and sometimes not appropriate. There's no doubt we got a bigger problem in the UK than France or Germany, the Eurozone or the US on inflation. The G7 countries as a whole, we got higher rates, but I'm just not sure. I really just don't think hitting people like this with mortgages going up, all your other lendings likely to, your credit card and your bank loans, your car loan, whatever it is. I'm just not sure it is the cure, and it can just actually make that cost of living crisis even worse, not better.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's turn to a different subject, perhaps not one that affects quite so many people, but it's still a big one if you live by the seaside, or if you ever fancy swimming in the sea, or if you live even near a river. Sewage overflows onto our beaches and rivers has been a big topic for the last few months, notably helped by Fergal Sharkey, former frontman for the Undertones, who is now a noted environmental campaigner and has drawn attention to just how much sewage gets pumped into our waterways whenever there's a storm, or even when there's not. And this week, the Environment Agency has advised anyone who is at the seaside in Lancashire, so Blackpool, places like that, not to go in the sea, because for the last 7 days there's been sewage in the water, and that is because there was a big storm about a week ago. So all the water, the sewage system overflowed, and there was also urgent repairs going on to a pipe that sort of helps connect the sewage treatment system to the sea. So it's not a great situation. And United Utilities, which is the water company concerned, is in fact the company that pumps the most sewage into our waterways of any utilities firm in the country. I mean, again, this is another very damaging one for the Conservative Party. And I saw a while ago Therese Coffey, the Environment Secretary, almost sort of admitted defeat on this and said, well, this is such a big long-term problem to solve that it's gonna be a while before things get better, which is not the hopeful, optimistic note one might have hoped for. I mean, do we just have to get used to wading through sewage if we're going to go for a swim in our beaches and rivers these days?
Yeah, if only Therese Coffey, the Environment Secretary, if only her party could have been in power for 13 years and she could have been a minister and latterly a cabinet minister for much of that time. If only they could have done something about it. Nothing shows how water privatization has failed than sewage on beaches and in rivers and in lakes. And people are fed up with it. And Fergal Sharkey, formerly the Undertones, he's moved on from his teenage kicks now to become a clean water campaigner. He's incredibly effective about it. And it's come up the political agenda. And that Blackpool is, and apologies now to Scarborough and Brighton and Bournemouth and Skeggy and my own South Shields, but Blackpool is the country's premier holiday resort on the seaside. That is, to be told you can't go in the sea because it's full of sewage. I mean, it's utterly appalling. And yes, there are other good reasons you can still go to Blackpool. And the council leader, Lynn Williams, I just thought sounded a beacon of controlled rage as she criticised United Utilities. There's just no excuse for it. As Fergal Sharkey pointed out, United, or he claimed, United Utilities last year paid 300 million to its shareholders. They can't have cash to give to those who buy a stake in it, investors and so on, but they don't spend the money on protecting the environment. And not putting sewage in our water should be a basic function of a water company. They were privatized at the end of the 1980s and the Thatcher period without any debt whatsoever. They were essentially given away. Now they've piled up the debt, they've paid out a fortune, and they just haven't invested the money. And of course, their latest plan to invest money so we don't get turds in our bathing water is to somehow charge us more when they're actually soaking us for a basic service they do not deliver. So I think it's absolutely appalling. And Blackpool, the people who live in it and people who visit it and that bit of the Lancashire coast shouldn't have to suffer this. I mean, if ever Labour should come up with a nationalisation programme, it should be this. I don't know why Keir Starmer's abandoned it, the pledge under Jeremy Corbyn, because it would just be hugely popular because people are just at the end of their tether. They just think these companies are just messing us around, and they won't fix it until they're taken over, and then it just becomes their raise on debt. That's why they're run. Therese Coffey, the Environment Secretary, could, if she likes, she could issue an enforcement order. She could fine them quite heavily, but she doesn't. She just lets them get away with polluting our waterways. And United Utilities is the worst, but it's not the only one.
It occurs to me, Kevin, that on both of these issues, I mean, they're both in their way quite complicated issues, and there's a lot going on under the surface, if you excuse the pun. But I mean, is it fair to say that on both of these issues, it's not entirely clear what Labour would do differently if they were in power right now? I mean, I know so for example, on inflation, on interest, like Rachel Reeves has been talking today about giving more immediate support to those who are struggling the most, but it's not clear in terms of big fiscal measures or whatever whether they would do anything different. And I must admit, I don't know what their policy is on, what Labour's policy is on sewage in the water, whether they would do something radically different to what the Conservatives are doing at the moment.
I think they're sticking plasters on gaping wounds. Now, interest rates going up is trickier to resolve. You could put pressure on the Bank of England not to do it. Rachel Reeves is going to put pressure on banks and building societies to, for instance, allow you to switch to just an interest-only mortgage. So you stop repaying some of your capital. You have at least 6 months notice before you could be repossessed. There are ways of alleviation, but it wouldn't solve the fundamental problem of that interest rates are going to be too high when people borrowed incredibly cheaply. And the ratio between house prices and earnings is massive now. It's just not like it was back in the 80s when interest rates went up to 15%. Then you basically had 1 to 2.5, 3 times your earnings, your earnings to your property prices. Now people right around the country, up north as well as in the south of England, are having to borrow at much bigger ratios, so they're at risk. On water, I think Labour could come up with a very simple solution and just say, right, it's public ownership, and then you're going to stop paying all that money in profits, dividends going out of the sector, and you invest them, and you just require water companies to build the capacity, so when there is a storm, the overflow will be contained rather than just going through pipes. You can have like one of those overflow pipes in your house, in your bathroom, just in case your cistern on your loo overflows, it'll just drip down your wall. Well, essentially, that's what the sewage companies are doing now, but it's filthy water. Now, you can just build the capacity, and if you get the rain that launched Noah's Ark, it might be difficult to contain, but you should have a big enough capacity for storms, and they don't. And it's because water companies have never been required to stop these massive sewage leaks, which is what they really are. Now, Labour, what would they do? I think they would use existing powers more strongly in issuing enforcement notices, and I think they'd be more eager to fine the water companies, and you can impose tougher regulations. So they would make some difference, but unless you just say, right, you can't do this anymore, then it'll just keep on happening. It'll just be rare, and it might be Blackpool next time, and it might be Whitby. It could be Morecambe. It could be somewhere else.
Yeah,
but it is.
I'd always fly the flag for Robin Hood's Bay, which is a delightful little fishing village on the North Yorkshire coast. But unfortunately, the water there is also had a no swimming warning issued on it. So it's not just not just Blackpool, unfortunately.
It's just intolerable. I know Robin Hood's Bay. I mean, it's a picturesque. It's kind of picture postcard, but you see it on a box of chocolates or biscuits, or get a jigsaw of it. And
not when the sewage floating in the water.
No, I mean, Robin Hood's Bay deserves better than let's say shits who are running the water industry and polluting it.
Let's move on to a more positive final topic. Move away from the ills that blight our nation for a nice feel-good story about your native northeast. And there's a local author who you've tweeted about, Glenda Young, who is funding. It's a really nice gesture, actually, funding a scholarship to a local university to help a young writer. How did you become interested in that one?
Yeah, the University of Sunderland, where I'll admit, I'm a visiting professor, but Glenda Young left school at 15 and went to the uni as a mature student, got a big break in life in a way, and she was doing Coronation Street blogs because she's a big soap fan, and got a work placement with ITV, and is now a best-selling author. She's written 8 sort of historical sagas set in Riot, which is a former pit village in the northeast. It's, when you're writing these books, you need a sense of place for people, and she writes historical novels there, things, titles like Belle of the Backstreets. And she's also been writing, what she calls cozy crime thrillers in Scarborough, and she was shortlisted for a prize alongside Richard Osman and Val McDermott. So you can see the company she keeps, but she just wants to give something back, and I think it's absolutely terrific. It's a £2,000 scholarship for somebody going to the university. They'll also get mentoring from them. So if they've got any flair, any interest in writing, she will help them. I did call her and say, you do realise you're launching your rivals. Is this really sensible? People might start buying their books rather than yours. But of course, she laughed because she's confident in her own writing. But it is just that idea of not forgetting where you started, how it was hard and tough, and hoping to help somebody on the way too. And just respect to her for that. It's just very nice. So well done.
Really is. That sounds like levelling up in action. If you were going to frame it in a political way.
If only we had a government who could think about that and actually put it into action.
Wouldn't that be nice? Well, we'll hear more about that in our next interview. But Kevin Maguire, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. And don't go into the water. It's not safe. It's not sharks. It's something worse than that.